Hello and welcome to the Browns Blitz. Today is Tuesday, January 28th, and this is episode 36. I'm your host, Rod Bloom, and I'm very happy to be joined by my friend Chase Richardson. How's it going today, Chase?
I'm doing great, Rod. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. Good to talk to you. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has. I'm really excited to talk some sports. I feel like it has been a minute since we talked, so it's gonna be fun.
Yeah. So you're going to school down in Florida. Why don't you fill everybody in on where you stand on the happenings in your life?
So I graduate in May. I'm a senior at the University of Central Florida. Go Knights! 2017 national champs. Uh, so I'm gonna graduate in May. I'm a pre-law major, so next year will be law school. Pending where I'm actually flying up to Ohio this Thursday. I'm going to tour the University of Akron and Ohio State law schools this weekend.
Nice.
Yeah. So I'm pretty excited. It's great. I mean, I love Orlando. Obviously, if Ohio State were to want me, then that would be a different story. But if none of the schools in Ohio work out, then I think I'll probably end up staying in Orlando. There's a couple good law schools here in town, and it's honestly one of my favorite places I've ever lived. Orlando is such a vibrant, young city, and there's a good sports scene here. I mean, I love going to see the Magic play, even though they aren't always very good. And I love Orlando City Soccer is also really fun to attend. And I mean, you can't understate how cool it is to have Disney and Universal Studios within driving distance.
Yeah, that'd be pretty nice. I can't blame you for wanting to, for enjoying being there and not minding if you end up hanging around there.
I mean, and it was 78 today. It can't be understated there either.
Well, it's definitely warmer than it was here. We don't have snow, we think it's like spring here or still fall because it's in the 40s, But,
Yeah, I know. I don't always miss it this time of year.
yeah, yeah. So remind me, where are you from originally? Have you lived in Ohio before?
Oh yeah, so I lived right outside of Youngstown up until middle school, and then I moved to Florida, and that's where I did high school.
Okay, so you're a Browns fan.
Yeah,
Grew up a
lifelong.
Browns fan, always been a Browns fan.
Oh
So
yeah.
so we're gonna talk some Browns, but before we do that, we're gonna talk about our Blitz beverages, and I'll kick things off. I'm drinking a beer, which is what I usually do if I'm not drinking water on the show. I'm drinking a beer that I brought back from um, yeah, Nashville, Indiana, actually, at the Big Woods at Hard Truth. And this is the Quaff on Blood Orange Yellow Dwarf.
Wow, that
And
sounds good.
it actually is. It's got just enough orange flavor in it, to I mean, just the right amount. You know, I, I'm not real big on fruit and beer, but but a little bit of flavor like that kind of just, it definitely supplements it, gives it a little extra flavor, and I like it. And I got to tell you, Hard Truth, it's a nice place. My wife and I went there last sometime last summer, I think,
Yeah.
and we enjoyed it. They had a peanut butter beer that I had there. I think a peanut butter porter that I
Wow.
had on draft, and it was excellent. But this is a
Yeah.
nice beer.
So yeah, you had told me that I was free to enjoy an adult beverage, so I had shot my lovely girlfriend Jamie a text, and I had her bring me one of our favorite beverages. It's actually a local Florida beer. It's a fruit cider. It's a pineapple Caribe. It's a local Florida brewery. We really enjoy it. You can really only get it in Central or South Florida, but it's one of my favorite drinks that I've ever had. It's very light. Uh, yeah, it's great pineapple flavor, and it's great for the winter. It's a really warm good beer.
So it's an actual beer with pineapple flavor in
Yeah,
it.
it's a pineapple flavored beer. Uh, I think it's technically like a hard cider, but it's
Hard
very
cider.
good.
Okay,
Yeah, it's very good.
that sounds good. I like pineapple,
Yeah, yeah, it's
so
great.
it sounds like a good choice. So, all right, we've got the formalities out of the way, so let's talk some Browns and let's kick it off kind of with the things that are in the news, and then we'll just kind of see where the conversation takes us, Chase.
Yeah, for sure.
So I want to get, we'll just kind of kick things off with Andrew Barry and your thoughts on this hire. Uh, to be the GM of the Browns, going to be the youngest GM in the league,
Hmm.
and coming back to the Browns. Some people are associating him with the Hugh Jackson era. He was here. As far as I can remember, he wasn't down on the field calling plays or actually making draft picks. So I've kind of been going back and forth with people that are, kind of giving him the 1-31
Right,
treatment,
right.
because I don't think he was actually the guy that was doing that. He was in the building, so you can blame him by association, but some of that was by design as well. So, what's your thought? What's your impressions, and how do you feel about Andrew Barry?
So, my thoughts, and this is something that I kind of believe in real life too, is that you can never have too many people that are smarter than you in the room or as smart as you. So I think that honestly, my whole opinion on it when I started to see kind of the same stuff you were talking about was him being here for 1-31. I don't even necessarily view as a detriment because he kind of saw the mistakes that happened, whether that be with how the coaching staff was put together, how the organization, like the organizational structure was happening, or what. I mean, I know a lot of those draft choices weren't him. I mean, a lot of that was Sashi, and I think giving him the blame isn't necessarily fair because they had a plan, and then Jimmy kind of wasn't on board with it at the end, and then Hugh wasn't on board with it because I think he saw the hit that he was kind of taking as far as his reputation as a coach. Just because, I mean, the roster wasn't terrible. Obviously it was exacerbated by incompetence on the part of the coaching staff. But I think that to give him 1-31 would be really unfair when I think that I view him as a very smart guy. And also, I like the hire just from the standpoint of I'm always in favor of fresh, young blood, whether it be coaching or, front office positions. I think that, for everything that's been made of organizational unity, giving Stefanski his guy, I think, will be really important because this is the first time, that I can really remember that everyone's kind of been on the same page and it hasn't been the owner hiring, a GM to pair with a coach or a GM hiring a new coach, from somewhere else, a former coordinator, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that this can be and will be really good for the Browns. I mean, we've seen what this approach has done for the 49ers, and I view John Lynch as, eminently intelligent, a good businessman, etc. So, I mean, I think that having smart guys, whether it be DePodesta or Stefanski or, now Andrew Barry in there, I view that as a plus, always a plus. And, yeah, I like the hire. I liked Andrew Barry from the beginning. I like the way the Eagles are run currently, their front office and their structure, the draft picks they've made, and and also just as a side note, I mean, only the second African American general manager. I mean, that's big. That's big for everything that was getting made of the Chiefs offensive coordinator not getting a fair shake as a coach. Hiring a African American general manager is great, especially for just the reputation of the Browns.
It's kind of hard to believe that that's the case, but yeah, definitely. And yeah, I think a lot of people feel like this is probably the combination that Haslam and DePodesta wanted from the beginning. Do you feel like this was predestined, or do you really feel like this process was carried out properly and that they came to the right conclusion and got the right people?
Well, I think either way it would have happened, it would have been confirmation bias. So, I mean, and for those that don't know what confirmation bias is, when something happens, you think to yourself, oh, I knew that was going to happen. But that's really just, something you thought was a possibility happening, and then you confirm it for yourself. So I think that had they not hired Barry and they would have hired Patton, you would have thought, oh, of course, they bring a guy from the Vikings to pair Stefanski, or, Barry's name had been linked to this since the beginning. So you think to yourself, oh, of course, it's him. It's been his name since the beginning. But when I think about the way baseball structures its front offices and DePodesta's history in baseball, I think that they carried out this search in a more orderly fashion. So I think that maybe Barry was who they wanted, and they went through the search to confirm that there wasn't anyone they wanted more, from the interview process. And then when there wasn't, they just came back to the person who they thought would be A, the most comfortable with Stefanski, and B, reflected whatever it was they were looking for the best. So, I mean, like I said, I had no problem with it. Truth be told, Stefanski was my first choice from the get-go. When they let Freddie go, I wanted Stefanski. And I honestly felt a little alone on that sometimes, whether it be on Twitter or anywhere else I was reading. But yeah, I mean, this honestly was my best case from the beginning, was this combination.
Yeah, I think some people had a bias against Stefanski before they really knew anything about him, because they heard that he was DePodesta's guy, from from a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think the tide really turned once people learned more about him. I think people see this as a good hire now in general. And I'm talking about Cleveland fans. I think the reaction outside of Cleveland was pretty overwhelming that this was a good hire when it happened.
Yeah.
Stefanski, I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I think the same's true of Andrew Barry. I think people believe that Andrew Barry is a very positive hire for the Browns, outside of Cleveland as well.
I kind of think that that's going to be the new norm moving forward in the NFL. I think that that's a trend you could see continue, is hiring a coach and then kind of letting him get his guy that'll draft guys and put rosters together that reflect, kind of a unified vision. I think Andrew Barry knows what Kevin Stefanski will want as far as offensive and defensive personnel, and I think he'll try and shape the roster to the best of his ability to reflect that. And I don't think it can be understated, again, just having guys that are smart, Harvard grads, Yale grads. I think that's can only be a positive in your organization.
Yeah, I agree with you. We'll get back to the front office and how all this stuff came together, but I wanted to talk about the move the Browns made today, which not a whole lot of moves going on right now, but the Browns did sign a fullback, Johnny Stanton, and Chase. I think you know more about him than I do, so I'm going to kind of let you talk about him a little bit.
So it's a guy that they brought over, I believe, from the Vikings organization. It's a guy that I don't think in the Vikings were able to carry on their 53 consistently, because C.J. Ham, I think, is their fullback, go-to, and has been for a few years. So I think the offense that Coach Stefanski wants to run, I think, is predicated, some of it at least, on the fullback position and having someone that can block effectively. So I think this is a guy that they had and liked and were kind of keeping, just down on the practice squad or, what have you, in case anything were to happen to C.J. Ham. But now the Browns have gone and scooped him up now that Coach Stefanski's in place. And I think that he's really going to assist, if he ends up being the fullback or whoever does. But the fullback position is going to be, very important for, kind of the wide zone running that they're going to be doing this season. I think that a lot's been made of that, whether it be on Twitter or any other news articles. The scheme that Stefanski runs, and you see all the success Dalvin Cook had in it this year. So I think that there's I think there's going to be kind of a reemergence of the fullback in Cleveland, which is kind of a throwback. Pretty exciting. A lot of two running back set stuff, and then stuff running out of the eye with the fullback, which I think will be interesting.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a little bit, and typically fullbacks coming out of college, they don't get drafted, and they're generally free agents. So they usually get signed as undrafted free agents brought into camp. So I'm just kind of curious as to how strong the opinion is here, how Stefanski's going to look at Johnny Stanton if they're going to bring in guys to compete with him, or if they're or if he already knows this is his guy. So
I think he views this as someone that's a strong candidate and someone that he knew he could go get just from obviously his experience in the Vikings organization. I would assume that they'll bring in people just to look at.
He was bringing a couple of fullbacks, huh?
Yeah, he was a former college quarterback. Was Stanton. So I think there's a definite degree of athleticism there. He was kind of a dual threat guy. He's not the fastest. I think his 40 time at the draft might have been like a 4.7, like the mid 4.7. So he's a fullback type guy.
Fullback though.
Yeah, they brought him in, and I think they just liked him from a physical standpoint, maybe at that position, and said to him, we're not going to keep you as a quarterback, obviously, but I think we think you have a future here as a fullback, and he's obviously made that transition and made it effectively enough that they decided to keep him on, whether it be the practice squad or, just down there in case anything were to happen to the fullback they have now. So I think this is a guy that Stefanski likes. I think it's a guy that he knows, and I think it's a guy that knows his offense just from at least the last year. So I think it's a guy that'll come into camp definitely with a leg up on whoever else they bring in, whether they bring anyone else in. I think it's a positive, and like I said, I think that you're going to see in the upcoming season that the fullback's going to have a renewed importance with the organization.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I was just looking. He's 6'2", 240. I was just kind of curious of his size. So definitely big enough to blow some holes open, things like that. So something they're looking for. So let's kind of get back to the way this thing was put together. With Stefanski and Barry and and DePodesta, all supposedly now reporting to Jimmy, I think is apparently how it's going to work out. We're still waiting on some members of the coaching staff to be hired. I think we know or have a good idea who those guys may be, but we still have to wait on official word probably after the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is, I think that this is aligned, and that's the buzzword that Jimmy and DePodesta have been thrown out. So things are aligned. Okay, so I think we agree. We got some smart guys here. This should be given a chance to work, right, Chase?
I personally, if I were Jimmy, give this 3.5 to 4 years at minimum. If you think that, I mean, and Rob, we say this every time, but if it doesn't work now with how you're doing it, will it work? I mean, if I'm Jimmy Haslam, and I've done this, and I've hired a coach that I like that is pretty much universally viewed as a smart, intelligent, young, up-and-coming guy, and then you let him, influence your pick of GM, and then you hire the GM, and he's a young, talented guy. I mean, Bill Polian who many people will know is 3-time, I think, former general manager of the year in the NFL, called Andrew Berry one of the smartest young men I've ever had the pleasure of working with. So you hire a guy like that with that kind of, glowing review from someone who most people would think of as an intelligent football guy, and then you go and you hire, do we know if it's going to be Joe Woods?
It sounds like it. I don't think. I mean, the Browns haven't said anything, but that seems to be that's the word that's out there, that he'll be the defensive coordinator.
So you go hire a young, up and coming defensive coordinator fresh off of the Super Bowl, and then whoever the OC ends up being, I mean, it could also be a young guy. You're going to have an extremely young coaching staff, a young front office, and it's going to be guys who are viewed around the league as intelligent, bright minds that are, kind of budding. And I think if Jimmy Haslam gives them the room to kind of flourish and come into their own, I think you might see this thing finally turn around. And we say this every time, but I mean, this is it. If it doesn't work now, I mean, you really got to start to ask yourself, is it going to work ever? Because this is wholesale, as opposed to when they brought Sashi in. This is wholesale embracing of young, new age stuff. There's not going to be anyone older, there's not going to be anyone with, quote unquote, an old school mindset. It's going to be everyone has the same view on what football is and how a team should be put together.
Right. Same page, working together, all aligned, smart guys willing to put the work in. Okay. What has happened in all of these other regimes, the past, however long you want to think back, just think back 5-7 years. It's always been something to where there's been some kind of power struggle. Two guys didn't get along. We got to get rid of one guy. Now we're going to get rid of the other guy. Okay. Now that we have all these guys here in a line, what I don't want to hear as an excuse for if this doesn't work is Jimmy Haslam coming out and saying something about somebody not getting along, or we needed to change this up or that up. Okay. If this doesn't work, it's because of Jimmy Haslam, because of him getting his nose in.
If this doesn't come together, I think that, the thing that has been said a lot, but the thing that I think will be confirmed is that, the common factor here at this point is the owner.
Yeah. Because we've put blame on, Dorsey went out the door. Now he's got blame on him. He didn't do stuff right. Freddie didn't do stuff right. He was in over his head, blah, blah, blah. The guy got 4 games before he was pretty much getting kicked out the door. And say what you want about that, but, Hugh Jackson, blame him. Blame Sashi, for not getting things done fast enough. Go back as far as you want. Jimmy has done a great job of deflecting blame to other people all the time. Even though I think we all know that there's a problem with ownership, he has never taken the blame squarely on himself. This time he is set up to where if this doesn't work, to where if he doesn't let this work, the blame needs to go directly on Jimmy. Jimmy and D.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. And I think that, I think we as fans look for someone to blame when things don't work out. And I think the hype of last offseason, just that kind of a crushing feeling, after an offseason that was, maybe the most hopeful I've ever experienced at 22.
Yeah.
I think that I think we look for someone to blame, and I think that a lot of people don't look to the owner, even though I do, and I know that you do, as far as, commonalities that have been problems over the last decade and a half. So I think that you can't fire the owner, so I think that
he's not going to sell the team.
No.
It's too profitable. He's not going to sell the team.
Oh, I agree with you. So I think that it's just, being that is what it is. We look for other people to blame because if we don't have anyone else to blame, then what are we doing? Something's not working.
Yeah.
I am with you 100% that if this does not work out, then I think that the only person we're going to have to blame is Jimmy Haslam and D. Haslam.
Yeah. So what do you need to see this season to feel like we're headed in the right direction with this team?
I want to see consistency. And I feel like that's been a buzzword with this team for as long as I can remember. I want to see consistency with the play calling. I want to see consistency with the energy level from the team, the performance of the team. I want to see a team that looks like they respect the coaching staff and their teammates. Mm-hmm. I want to see guys that aren't playing selfish, just penalty-wise. And that's not a shot at Miles so much as it was with the O-line of last season. I want to see consistent, congealed. I don't care if they go 8-8. If they're playing together and they're in games. If you're losing close, that's fine. The NFL is built for parity. So, yeah, more seasons than not, you're probably going to go 8-8, 7-9, 9-7. I get that. I'm with that, and I understand it because that's what most NFL franchises have been and will be. So, to me, if you get a 10-6 season, great. If you get a 6-10 season, fine. Something's probably got to change. But the NFL is built for parity, and what we haven't seen from the Browns, over the last 10 years, but especially the last 4 or 5, is consistent effort from the team, from the coaching staff. Guys that come out on Sunday and look like they're ready. The story of last season to me was always opening the game with 1 or 2 drives, and you think, that's it, this is it, that's what they should be. And then the rest of the game, there's just this lull. In the middle 30 minutes of the game, every single week, there was this lull. And they would look flat offensively. The defense looked overwhelmed, like they didn't know what was coming, or they were just out of sorts. And you can do all the scheming you want if you're, Steve Wilks. And there's just, if your guys aren't ready and they aren't prepped and they don't know what they're doing, then, there's nothing you can do. Because those guys out there in front of you are equally as talented as you. Like I said, because the NFL is built for parity, so your edge comes from your personnel, who you have, and, your scheme. And it was apparent last year that A, the coaching staff wasn't getting guys ready every week, and B, they were outcoached. They looked overmatched. Freddie Kitchen's staff every week looked completely outmatched, and that blew me away. Because when I came into the season, I thought, wow, 2 former head coaches as your coordinators. Those guys are going to be ready and locked in every week because those guys know exactly how to coach guys. Because if they didn't, they wouldn't have gotten jobs as head coaches from being coordinators.
Well, I have to say, I think a lot of people can't wait to get rid of Steve Wilks. And I think I kind of jumped on that bandwagon too. But thinking back, I think Steve Wilks actually did a pretty darn decent job with the defense for the injuries he had. And the way the offense performed at times. And you have to be realistic about what this league is now. You can't expect your defense to go out there and give up 6 points each week in this league.
I think Steve Wilks got a raw deal, and I said that. I said that from the beginning. I think that Steve Wilks got a raw deal. He dealt with injuries that are crazy. His best player gets suspended for, helmet gate, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
He dealt with injuries in the back, especially in the back end.
Corners, yeah. Starting corners gone for the first 4 or 5 games, and
you were on your fourth or fifth safety by the end of the year.
Yeah.
So
yeah, he had a rough time. He really did. I really think he did a lot better job than what people think, and I really think the expectations for a defensive coordinator in this town are unrealistic. I think if the defensive coordinator is going out there and on average, allowing less than 20 points a game, you're doing a pretty darn good job in the NFL.
Had Had that been an above average offense last year, they would have won 9, 10 games because their defense
Yeah,
had them in almost every game they played.
that's true. That's very true. So yeah, I don't put a lot of that on Steve Wilks. So real quick, Chase, give me a couple of roster wise, maybe a couple of surprises, things that you expect to happen. I think we know that the Browns are going to look at uh, tackle. They're going to upgrade at tackle. They're probably going to do something at tight end. They've already signed a fullback. Um, and maybe I'm not sure other specific things. There's some things on defense I'll look at. Safety, definitely. Maybe some surprises. Maybe some guys on the roster now you don't expect to be here.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to look for guys that have high salaries that they'll be able to get out from under. That maybe haven't necessarily contributed a lot. I think a guy like Kirksey, you might see out the door. Guys that have dealt with injuries but maybe haven't been able to contribute as much as they would have liked to. The guy that, like I said, the guy that jumps to the front of my mind in that scenario is Kirksey. I don't think you're going to see a guy like Morgan Burnett. I don't think you're going to see him back. I think that they'll probably let Demarius Randall walk, and they'll look at. I think they're definitely going to be looking at defensive backs in the middle rounds. They have an extra third-round pick from the Texans, so they're going to need an athletic tackle. And I think a guy that a lot of people are looking at and are excited by, and has kind of had Twitter buzzing, was Becton from Louisville, the tackle.
Yeah, so ever since Kuiper named him, I think a lot of people have been researching him if they didn't know about him already.
I mean, he's huge. Former basketball player. Really, really light on his feet for a guy that size. I think he's 6'7" or 6'8".
Yeah.
I mean, he's absolutely a massive human. I think I almost want to say I saw 360 pounds.
I saw 370.
Yeah, just a mountain. Huge. And extremely light. I mean, I watched a little bit of his highlight tape, and he gets out on the edge and blocks and runs and will escort running backs downfield, which is shocking to see someone that size do. And That's what they'll need. And we've talked, Rod, about this, just the scheme that Stefanski, was kind of known for with the Vikings, just wide zone run stuff, just to help the O-line and to help make it easier on the running back, just to get them more space. And I think you see the success that the 49ers are having right now offensively, running the ball, especially the last game, the conference championships. You see a guy that we're familiar with, Raheem Mostert.
It doesn't even matter who's carrying the ball.
Yeah, it's wide zone runs. And the thing that's so impressive to me about Kyle Shanahan is, for the longest time, the thing that was conventional in the NFL running laterally was if it's on the right hash mark, and you're lining up to run wide, they're going to put, most of their guys on the left side, or, because that's where that's the most space. That's where the ball's going to go. The thing that Kyle Shanahan has done is they'll put all their guys on the right side of the field, the short side, and they'll run that way. And it's less space, but it's condensed, so there's less guys over there to, make a tackle. And they've had a lot of success doing that, and there's a lot of that in the tape for Stefanski as well, which is really impressive and kind of shows you and, all of us the forward thinking that he's doing as far as looking at what other guys are successful with and adapting it. So I think that you're going to see a lot of really good runs from Nick Chubb next season, strong, wide runs, and hopefully, whoever they bring in at tackle will be able to get out there and block.
Yeah, I can't wait to see how Nick Chubb's going to perform in this offense. It's going to be exciting. So, well, Chase, it's been great talking to you. Why don't you tell everybody your Twitter handle so everybody can give you a follow?
Yeah, no, that would be great. You can follow me over on Twitter at Chase, capital C, Chase KR19. It's mostly sports and politics. I do work for a congresswoman here in Florida, so it's mostly sports and politics, but mostly sports. Uh, so yeah, everyone feel free to follow me, and I'll follow back.
That sounds good. All right. Thanks, Chase. It's been great talking to you.
Yeah, you too, Rod.
We're going to welcome in Peter Jones to the podcast. Peter, how are you doing now?
I'm very good, Rod. How are you?
I'm just fine. Just fine. It's good to talk to you.
Yeah, you too, buddy.
So we've got a Super Bowl coming up this weekend, and rather than talk about Super Bowls, I think you have a topic that's a little bit, just off, a little bit different from that you wanted to talk about. So why don't you introduce that, and we'll get the discussion rolling.
Yeah. So with my NFL history hat on, Rod, I thought that rather than, as you said, talk about the Super Bowl, I thought we'd talk about a few NFL championship games that happened just before the Super Bowl. So from kind of 1960 to 65, we'll kind of quickly meander our way through those. And I guess demonstrate that there was an NFL championship before the Super Bowl ever existed.
Yeah. That people kind of forget about a lot of times.
Yeah. And I think as we talk about these games in the early 60s, there's a lot of great names, a lot of Hall of Fame names that will crop up.
Sounds good.
Fantastic. So I guess as we head into, or the NFL headed into 1960, there was the looming AFL about to kick off. But from the NFL side, there were two, I guess, really hugely successful teams at that point of the late 50s, which were the Baltimore Colts and the New York Giants. Mm-hmm. And the Colts, with Johnny Unitas, had won the previous two NFL championships in 58 and 59, beating the Giants in both of those games. And as we headed into 1960, there were a few other up-and-coming teams, which were the Eagles, the Lions, and the Packers, and the Cleveland Browns. And all of those names will crop up in the next few minutes as we go through this. So there wasn't a playoff structure as such back then. There were two conferences, the East and the West, and there were 6 teams in each of those conferences as 1960 broke, and then the Cowboys came in 60 and the Vikings in 61. But the winners of those two conferences played off in the NFL championship game. So there was no getting into the playoffs for being in second place or wild cards or anything like that. You had to come at the top of your conference or you were out.
Yeah.
So I guess the first championship was of the 1960s was the Eagles and the Packers. The Packers coached obviously by Vince Lombardi, and Vince had been the defensive coordinator with the Giants. The offensive coordinator with the Giants, whilst Tom Landry was the defensive coordinator with the Giants. Mm. And the Packers lost that game to the Eagles 17-13. But one of the things that's often missed about that game is that Norm Van Brocklin, who quarterbacked the Eagles in that game, by winning that championship, he became the first man and the only man at that point to win NFL championships as a quarterback with 2 different teams.
Wow.
And you kind of think of the history of the league and you think, well, that can't be possible. It's actually true. And he was the only man all the way through until when Peyton Manning did it 4 or 5 years ago with the Broncos. So right. Manning became just the second quarterback in the history of the league to win championships with two different teams. And as I say, the Eagles won that really hard-fought game on their home field in Franklin Field in Philadelphia, because the championship games then were played on the home fields of one of the teams playing, and it alternated between the Western Conference champion one year and the Eastern Conference champion the following year.
Okay. And record didn't have anything to do with it; just alternated.
It just alternated, yeah, and it wasn't actually until the 1970s that the playoff records came into play as to who got home field advantage. So even in the early 70s, you might get a team with a lesser record hosting a team with a better record. Which is
interesting.
It's kind of bizarre now. I mean, just as an aside, I think at some point they're gonna have to look at this thing of division champions with a poor record hosting. So you can win a division, let's say at 8-8, and you end up hosting a wild card team at 11-5. I think
right.
I think at some point they're going to have to look at that. But
I think so.
But no. Back in the day, it alternated between the Western champions and the Eastern champions, and in 1960, I say the Eagles won the championship with a team that featured Norm Van Brocklin, and that may be a familiar name to Cleveland Browns fans from back in the 50s, when Cleveland was vying with the Los Angeles Rams back then for the title in the early 50s.
Yes.
And Van Brocklin was quarterbacking the Rams back then.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And that's when he won his first title, and I say won his second there with the Eagles. It's also interesting. 1960 was the year they constituted a playoff bowl, which was for the third and fourth place teams. So the teams that finished second in each of the conferences ended up playing a third and fourth, what in essence was a third and fourth playoff game. Which
for
was
third and fourth place. I didn't know that.
For third and fourth place, which Vince Lombardi used to call the Losers Bowl. And when you think about it, it's one of the most pointless games that ever there was. But in 1960, the Lions beat the Browns in that game.
Okay. I bet those guys were all thrilled to be playing in that game. Of course, they probably got an extra paycheck out of it, so they probably actually were happy to be playing in it.
Probably true, and of course back then in those kinds of games, they would have been playing at 110%. Nothing like the Pro Bowl we've just seen this past weekend, where where flag football's more physical than the Pro Bowl.
Right.
But yeah, and just so the ticket prices in that 1960 championship game, you could get a ticket for $8.
Well, I mean, I've looked at Super Bowl ticket prices now, so that was a pretty good deal. But I'm sure $8 sounded pretty steep in 1960.
It probably did. So we head into 1961 and 62 were kind of lumped together, because in 61 and 62, the same teams got to the championship game in both years, the Packers and the Giants. And the Giants were quarterbacked by Y.A. Tittle.
Uh-huh.
Tittle had been, a huge name with the 49ers in the 50s before he was kind of surprisingly traded to the Giants. And the 49ers felt that Tittle was kind of at the end of his career when they traded him, and that turned out not to be the case. In fact, his career kind of took an upward curve when he went to the Giants.
Yeah.
But he had, I guess, the unfortunate thing there of coming up in 61 and 62 in the championship game against Lombardi's Packers at their peak.
Right. Right.
Many people reckon that the Packers team of 62 is probably the greatest Packers team ever. So it's a team that featured Bart Starr and Paul Hornung and Jim Taylor and all of those guys.
Yeah.
And so in the 61 championship game, the Packers blew out the Giants 37-0 in a game hosted in Green Bay, and it was the first postseason game ever held in Green Bay.
Wow.
And with the Giants losing that game, as I mentioned earlier, they'd lost in 58 and 59 to the Colts. So losing again in 61, they'd now lost 3 championship games in 4 years. And then they lost again to the Packers in 62. So at that point, they'd lost 4 championship games in 5 years. That's kind of getting on for the level of the Buffalo Bills.
Of the Bills, yeah, definitely, yeah.
And poor old Y.A. Tittle, he was the league MVP in 61, but just couldn't. Yeah, I guess kind of like Jim Kelly, just couldn't quite get his team over the line to win the title.
Well, sometimes you just come up against a better team. People look at it different ways. People look at it like, what did that team do? What were they missing? But sometimes it's just the fact that you come up against teams that are better.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the other guys get paid too. And
yeah,
it can be, you can have a really good season, and it's just all about what happens on that particular day.
Yeah, that's true.
And even though most of us don't like to think about it, there is a luck factor in every game. We don't always know how big that luck factor is, but luck does come into it.
Oh, our Browns fans definitely know about luck.
Yeah,
most of it on the bad side, recently, anyways.
Yeah. So those were the 61 and 62 championship games. The 62 game was a lot closer. That was Packers won that game 16-7.
Okay.
And that was the last NFL championship game to be played at the old Yankee Stadium.
That's interesting. That's pretty neat.
Yeah. And again, the ticket prices for that game were $8 in 1962, and the TV rights. So NBC had the TV rights then, and $615,000 was the cost of the TV rights. So I don't know what that works out to in modern day numbers, but I think that's quite a big number.
I mean, it sounds big. It's hard to figure based on what today's dollars are. I mean, that doesn't even come close to buying you a 30-second commercial now.
No, I'm sure it doesn't.
Yeah, but it's hard to calculate, off top of our heads what that is in today's money.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing worth noting about 1962 is that the Packers' Jim Taylor won the rushing title in 62, which of course was the only year that Jimmy Brown didn't win it.
Yeah.
So while we've got this kind of Packers-Giants thing going on in 61 and 62, we've got a Cleveland Browns team that is just beginning to grow at that point, with Jimmy Brown, and I guess the underrated Frank Ryan at quarterback, I would say.
Yeah.
He's kind of a guy that, I guess probably unless you're a Cleveland Browns fan, he's kind of a guy that could easily get forgotten about. But he's a far better quarterback. When you go and look at his numbers, and there's quite a bit of film knocking around about him, he's a far better quarterback than people probably give credit for.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the case. Yeah.
So that was 61 and 62. So we wander into 1963, and so the Bears beat the Packers out in the Western Conference by half a game. So the Bears made it to the championship game, and that's a Bears team with that's Mike Ditka's rookie season as a tight end. But it's a Bears team that really featured a strong defense. The original monsters of the Midway defense, the Hall of Famers like Bill George were on that team. And again, the Giants made it yet again to the championship game, led by Y.A. Tittle at quarterback, and Tittle threw 36 touchdown passes that year in 1963, which was the NFL record. And it's a record that stood until Dan Marino broke it in 1984. So it's quite an astronomical performance to throw 36 touchdown passes, 14 game schedule, of course, back then, and under the rules that they played. So this was really Y.A. Tittle's last opportunity to try and win that NFL championship. But unfortunately, it wasn't to be. The Bears defense kind of beat up on Y.A. that day, and the Bears won that game 14-10. And Tittle ended up throwing 5 interceptions, and it was just I guess if you were a Giants fan, that's your 5th championship game loss in 6 years, which is incredible to think about.
Yeah. So tell me, Peter, do you think the East was just not that strong to where the Giants were able to win it year after year after year, or were the Giants that good of a team? I mean, do you think that the conferences were unbalanced at that point?
I don't think so. I think that what tended to happen is that teams would win the conference by one game or half a game. There was very rarely was there a runaway winning team, if you like. So I don't think that there was a particular balance issue. I just think that the Giants of that time were just, if you look at the players that they had on that roster, well, obviously we've talked about Y.A. Tittle a lot, but Hall of Famers like Roosevelt Brown at tackle, Frank Gifford was on that roster, Sam Huff, middle linebacker, Andy Robustelli on the defensive line. It was a very strong Giants team. So I think that as we said, I think they were as dominant in their time as any other team. They just couldn't get over the line in that period.
Yeah, so they generally had a similar record to the team they were playing for these championships.
Yeah, so if you look at the Giants, the Giants in 61 were 10-3-1, and they played the Packers, who were 11-3, so half a game difference. In 62, Packers were 13-1, the Giants were 12-2, so 1 game difference. In 63, the Giants and the Bears both had 11 wins, so very, very, very similar.
It's just kind of how it worked out, huh?
Yeah, and it must have been absolutely sickening to be a Giants fan at that. Well, clearly you love all the wins during the regular season, but to keep going to the championship game, 5 times in 6 years and losing all of those isn't it incredible thing.
Peter, I'm sorry to interrupt you. There's this kind of sports karma thing that kind of happens, and all those Giants losses to where they seem to just not have the luck back then. And then you look at the 2 Super Bowls they won.
Yeah.
With Eli, where they seem to be overmatched, where they seem to just have, I'm not going to call it luck, but things just kind of went their way on some of these just improbable plays that happened, and it just kind of, that you would not have expected to play, and it just kind of seems to have paid them back in some way. 50 or 60 years later.
No, that's absolutely right, and I guess it goes like that. It's it's as a Packers fan, it's easy for me to think of the Packers as the team of the 60s. But had the Giants won those championship games, they would have been the team of, they could easily have won 5 championships in 6 years there.
Yeah.
And that Bears championship again, that 63 title. That was the last championship the Bears won until Super Bowl 20 team. You know, the 46 defense in 1985. And then we head into 1964, which for Cleveland Browns fans is a great year, I think.
It's the year we all know. Everybody knows it's the year we look back to. It's the year we want to, celebrate once again at some point.
And it's a very interesting Cleveland Browns team. So they came up against the Colts in the '64 championship game, and the Colts were big favourites in that game. Same as the Colts were in Super Bowl III a few years later against the Jets. The Colts still had, Johnny Unitas at quarterback, Raymond Berry, Lenny Moore. So, this was a great Colts team.
Yeah.
And it's quite bizarre that, the Browns came into that game dead last in total defense in the regular season. And yet, as much as the greatness of the Browns offense that we'll touch on in a minute, the defense probably won that game.
True. That's absolutely true. Yeah.
For the Browns, holding the Colts to less than 200 yards of offense, multiple turnovers. I think Unitas had less than 100 yards passing. Well, that didn't happen very often.
Right.
So it's an incredible defensive performance by the Cleveland Browns in that game. But when you look at the Browns offense, Jimmy Brown, what more can you say? Jim Brown, we already touched on Frank Ryan at quarterback. That's a guy that went to 3 consecutive Pro Bowls when the Pro Bowl really meant something.
Mm-hmm.
And in the period in which he played, nearly 150 touchdown passes, more than 16,000 career passing yards. It's a really, even I was surprised when I looked at some of those numbers. So it kind of goes under the radar.
Yeah.
And that 64 team had Paul Warfield was his rookie season, and he had nearly 1,000 yards receiving that year. So quite Gene Hickerson, the Hall of Fame guard on that team. So it's a really strong Browns offense. So it's kind of bizarre that the defense really won that game.
Yeah, it really is. But,
for the Browns. Kind of some some asides about that game. Apparently, that was the last NFL game in which the penalty flags were white.
Really had no idea about that.
No, I really kind of bizarre thing. And the last NFL game that only had five officials, so they added the 6th official, the line judge, the following year. First NFL title game to be televised by CBS. So pretty much they were all televised by NBC before then.
Wow.
So I think that's. I think in that period, in kind of 63, 64, 65, 66, you had a very, very strong Cleveland Browns team, and I guess that didn't come around again for Cleveland probably until the late 70s and then the 80s, I guess, with Bernie Kosar and the guys.
Yeah, I mean, there was a period there with Brian Sipe where they made the playoffs, but it didn't get far, and then and then the 3 AFC championship games with Bernie. And since then we're waiting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's well, we shall see how it goes. And then we go into 65, and the Browns made the championship game again, and this time coming up against the Packers. Game played in Green Bay, and we talked about the Browns' defense in the 64 championship game. So it's the Packers' defense that really got the Packers over the line in that 65 championship game. holding Jimmy Brown to, I don't know the rushing yardage, but a relatively low number of rushing yards, whilst the Packers ran for just over 200 yards in that game. And that was kind of the difference in that game. It was a game played in rain and snow and mud, and so really was a game for the running backs. And it was probably, as I say, I don't know the total of rushing yards that Jimmy Brown had, but probably one of the lowest that he would have had in a postseason game, certainly.
Again, the Packers are at the height of their height of their run at that point.
So and that and the Packers would go on, won that championship, and then they would win in 66 and 67. But of that 3-year period, that 65 team was probably the strongest of the three. Because the team gradually got older. But that 65 Packers team, had Bart Starr and Jimmy Taylor and Horning and Jerry Kramer and all of those guys. So it was just, it was a really, really strong Packers team. And that 65 championship was the last of the pre-Super Bowl era. So, from that point, from 66 onwards, we get to where the champion of the NFL plays the champion of the AFL in the Super Bowl. But I guess one of the other things that 65 championship game kind of had was it was the last game for the Cleveland Browns that Jimmy Brown played.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, he would go on and play in the Pro Bowl game the week after that, but that was the last game that Jimmy Brown played for Cleveland. And sitting here just outside London, it's kind of bizarre that he announced his retirement whilst in London in the July of 66. He was out here making a film. I don't know which movie it was.
I believe it was the Dirty Dozen.
Was it? Yeah. And he announced his retirement from London, and I think that
in Cleveland we know facts like this that we shouldn't even know because Jim Brown should have played like 3 or 4 more seasons.
At least, and there'll be lots of. I've seen lots of interviews with Packers players that played in that 65 championship game, and obviously elated to win it and all of that. But one thing they all bring up was that they played in the last game that Jimmy Brown played in.
Yeah,
and I think that just kind of it almost sends shivers down my spine. And I'm not a Cleveland Browns fan. It's just one of those. It's just one of those things, and you're right. Had he gone on to play 3 or 4 or 5 more years, which he physically, barring a serious injury, could easily have done. Who knows what might have happened?
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is Jim Brown we're talking about. We're not talking about the average human being here.
Absolutely. And that's a very brief meander through those 6 championships of the 60s prior to the Super Bowl era. So we've kind of got, we've mentioned a lot of the great players that played in that period: Jimmy Brown, Y.A. Tittle, Johnny Unitas, Bart Starr, if you will. So it was a period of some really, really good, if not great, football teams that came up against each other. Think of the Packers of that period, you think of the Browns of that period, you think of the Baltimore Colts of that period, and the New York Giants of that period. Some great, great teams with multiple Hall of Famers that all came up against each other, that were bashing the living daylights out of each other for 5 or 6 years there. So yeah, I just thought that would be something slightly different to talk about as we head into Super Bowl week.
Yeah, well, I enjoyed that. I hope everybody listening did too, and because I had TV on last night or night before, and I saw a kind of a flashback. They're going through all the Super Bowls, and for as long as I can remember, it's almost like there's this thought, this vision that in the NFL, somebody took an eraser and erased everything.
Yeah.
And we started just a clean slate when Super Bowl I happened. And I think that's just kind of silly. And people need to realize there was football before that the first Super Bowl really didn't change things that much. It's just a different championship game. So I thank you for going through all that, because, especially in Cleveland, we like to think that there was football before Super Bowl I, because there were some pretty meaningful games for us before that.
Well, absolutely. And if you look at the Browns history from the end of the Second World War onwards, the Browns have played in eight NFL championship games.
Yeah.
So it's an incredible history. The Giants, yes, they've won Super Bowls, but that team of the late 50s and early 60s that got to 5 championship games in 6 years, how great a team was that?
Yeah, why are they just supposed to forget about that?
Yeah,
it seems kind of silly. So I think hopefully a lot of people will enjoy hearing about that, and it'll kind of encourage some people to look back at those games, and maybe even further, into the great history of the NFL.
And the good news about a lot of those 60s games, people can go onto YouTube today, and highlights, the 25 or 30-minute highlights of all of those games are there.
Excellent.
So yeah, it's a good watch.
Yeah. Well, it's been great talking to you, Peter. I hope you enjoy the Super Bowl. I know your Packers didn't make it, but I think it's going to be a good matchup. And I look forward to talking to you about it in a couple of weeks.
Thanks for having me on, Rod. As always, really, really enjoyed it and really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, this has been the Browns Blitz. We thank you all for listening, and we will catch you next time.